guys, welcome back to Motuts, Motion Made Easy. My name is John Navarro, and if this is your first time joining us, this is the Tron Disintegration tutorial part 2. If you did not see part 1 to this tutorial, no worries. You can click here or follow the link in the description below. And just as a recap, this is what we're going to be creating.
As you see the light cycle come through, there's a burst of light, which is the particle explosion, and then we see the titles start to kind of disintegrate, and break apart, and then turns into all these small little particle cubes that disperse on the floor. There's two parts to this transition.
Let's start by creating the DRes group. Hit the plus sign. Select group, rename this DRes, and then what we want to do is go into our library. We want to go into replicators, and we want to hit transitional replicators, and then in the transitional replicators we want to search for the replicator that says crossword. And you can see based on the preview that what this does is there's a bunch of little squares that kind of disappear and disintegrate, revealing a black alpha background, which will act as our mat, right? So we're going to apply this crossword transition to the DRes layer, then select the crossword transition. And in the inspector, what we want to do is just reshape this so that it goes the full width of the title. So we want to open up the size parameter. We want to change the width to 1000. And we can actually reduce the height to 300. Okay. So that covers it, and then what we want to do is also increase the amount of columns. So we're going to change that to 30, and now you'll see that the entire space is covered. Additionally, I forgot to mention we set the endpoint at 5 seconds. That will be the beginning of this DRes transition, which comes after the end of our title animation.
In the second part of this, what we want to do is we created our title and subtitle. We now want to group these into their own separate group. So we're going to create a new group and just call this text. Grab our titles and subtitle groups and just drag those into the text group.
So now we're going to add the image mask to the text group. Select the group, click on Object, add image mask, and in the image mask source well, we're going to drag and drop the DRes folder. And if we play this back from the 5-second point, you'll see what we just did.
So what we also want to do is once this reaches the end, which let's say we'll call that, make the DRes end at 7 seconds, comes in at 5 seconds, boom, boom, boom. So at 7 seconds, we want to set the out point for the text group. So we just want to trim the group to 7 seconds. This dereses. We see a nice transition right there.
So easy enough, right? That's part 1 of this transitional effect. Part 2 is going to be the particle emitter, and this is going to be a little bit more tricky. A couple more steps here. So let's add the new group. We're going to name this group Particles. And then in the library, now what we want to do is scroll down to the Contents folder. In Contents folder, we want to go to Particle Images. And in the search window for Particle Images, we want to type in Pixel. So you'll see right there, Pixel PNG. We're going to apply this pixel. Now in the inspector window, what we want to do is we want to reset the properties for this pixel. So we want to set the scaling down to about 20%. So now it's a nice small pixel. One more thing we want to do to this pixel is we want to give it some depth. So we want to go into the filters, stylize, clear out the pixel in the search window. So stylize, and then under stylize, what we want to do is search for extrude right here. We want to apply the extrude filter. You'll see it bump this out. If I zoom in here, you'll see that it bumped it out a little bit. And we don't need it to be that pronounced, so we'll go into the inspector, click on extrude, and where it says distance, we're going to cut that in half. I'm going to make that 25. And now it looks like a little box. So that's better. That's pretty much all we need for this part. So now what we're going to do with this pixel is we're going to select the pixel. We're going to create an emitter. We do that by hitting the E key, E for emitter. And so when we play this back, you'll see that this starts to spray out a bunch of pixels in a random direction. We don't want that. We also want this to last to the end of the animation. So click on emitter, hit O, and that's going to go out for the entire duration of the animation. Okay. The other thing we want is at some point we're going to want this to fade out. So with the emitter selected, click on behaviors, basic motion, fade in, fade out. Move the fade in time to 0. Leave the fade out time at 20, or if you want it to be a very abrupt fade out or short fade out, you can reduce this to 10. I'm going to reduce it to 10. So when we watch this back, we see we get that. Okay, so how are we going to make this look like an actual particle explosion that's emanating from the title that is derezzing? So the solution for how we figured out to create this particle dispersion kind of explosion effect came from our good friend Simon Ubsdell. You can find his tutorial on Wizardry, which gives a very in-depth detail on how to use this particle emitter along with a couple other parameter behaviors in order to influence the gravity as well as the pull or resistance to the particles as they interact with various surfaces. So again, Simon Ubsdell, great resource. Thanks, brother. Appreciate the knowledge. So you could definitely apply that same technique in any multitude of different ways. So that is how we achieve this. And so now what we want to do is go into our particles emitter, and we want to start changing some of these controls. So the first thing we want to do is change the point to image. For the image well, what we want to do is drag this text layer into the image well, and then we want to change this from tile fill to random fill. And when we scrub back through, we see that we have these random pixels that kind of are floating out into the ether. That's not really what we want, so we're going to continue to adjust this. What we want to do is we want to make this 3D, so click on 3D. We want the emission latitude to be 350 degrees. We want the emission longitude to be 0, and we want the emission range to be 177 degrees. Now when we play that back, we see that the particles disperse out and down. Additionally, what we want to do is we want to make sure that depth order is checked. We want the render order to be oldest first, and we want the particles to interleave, so make sure that that's checked as well. We want to change our birth rate from 30 to 3,000. Shout out to Andre. So now we have a bunch of particles. We want the birth rate random to stay at 0. Initial number can stay at 0. We want the life to be somewhere around 20. And we want the life randomness to be 5. For the angle, we want this to be 45 degrees. We'll set the speed randomness to 15. We'll set the angle randomness to 5. The spin randomness to 3. The spin to 3, excuse me. And the spin randomness to 6. We'll check additive blend. And you'll see we have all these different shape pixels now. So some of these, as they come out, are getting pretty big, which I don't want. I want the particles to be different sizes, but not so huge, not these huge chunks of particles. So what I want to do is I want to scroll down and I want to change the scale. So I'm going to reduce the scale till I get somewhere that I like. 50% is probably going to be the sweet spot. All right, so now you'll see we have really tiny particles and then a couple of cube particles here that feel more like what we saw in the disintegration in our Tron sample. Now we have the scale randomness, we can say 5. We're good with this. So now, how are we going to address this particles flying out into the ether situation? We're going to correct this by adding a parameter behavior for gravity. So go into behaviors, simulations, and gravity. We're going to click on this gravity and we're going to make the acceleration for the gravity 100. So now when we scrub through, we had a little problem where we were trying to add the gravity parameter and it was still dispersing out way too far into the environment. And so what I figured out was that the speed was actually set too high. I had set it to 1,000. I wanted to leave it at 100. So I reset it to 100. And now when we scrub through, you'll see, beautiful particles. They fall to the floor, right? Now this looks like this is disintegrating from the text and everything is falling down to the bottom. But there's one thing that's missing here. And that is that we also want this to interact with the environment. And so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add one more behavior, go into simulations, and we're going to do edge collision. And as the behavior would suggest, as these particles fly out and fall, they're going to interact with each other as well as with the boundaries that we set. So we want to make sure that affect sub-objects is checked. We want to reduce the bounce to a minimal. I'm going to say 3%. If you want a little bit more bounce, you can make it 5%. But you want the bounce to look natural and not cartoonish. So 3 to 5% is really the sweet spot for that setting. Now, what we also want to do is we want to make these particles look like they're going out into 3D space. So we want to give the illusion of depth. So we want to change some of these things. We don't want it to interact with the left or right face of the boundary, nor do we want it to interact with the back or front face of the boundary. And so what that's going to do is as these disperse, you'll see they go forward and backward. I know that's hard to tell because it's against black, but when we add our background in part 3 of this tutorial, you'll see what I mean by that depth. So what we want to do is we want to change the width of the depth to 0. We then want to change the height to the height of the title, which was about 400. And then we want the actual depth, meaning the z-space depth of where these particles can disperse through. We want to set that to 1,000. That was the parameter that I had mixed up earlier. So my apologies. Now when we scrub through, you can see that this is going forward and backward and interacting with the floor, the invisible floor right now, but the floor that we are going to add later. And that's it, guys. That's part 2 of our tutorial. We have this beautiful title transition that comes in. We have the flickering of the text. We have the particle disintegration and derez effect. And now in part 3, we will take care of all the stylizing, adding the bells and whistles, and putting our finishing touches. So that's it, guys. Again, my name is John Navarro from Motuts. Thanks for joining us for this tutorial. If you like the content, please don't forget to click subscribe and share. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I will see you next Monday for our Motion Mondays at 9 p.m. where we will have part 3, the final part to this Tron derez disintegration title tutorial. Thanks for watching.